The envelope looked expensive. Thick cream paper. Gold lettering. The kind of envelope wealthy people use when they want cruelty to feel elegant. My father held it between two fingers, while soft piano music floated through the ballroom behind him. Crystal glasses clinked somewhere near the champagne tower. Guests whispered beneath glowing chandeliers. And right in the middle of my sister Olivia's wedding reception, with more than 200 people watching, my father calmly said the words I will never forget. "This is from the family." The room went quiet instantly. Not completely silent. Wealthy rooms are never truly silent. There is always the sound of people waiting for entertainment. Olivia stood beside him in a white satin gown worth more than my first year in the army. Her lips twitched slightly before she hid the smile. She already believed, she knew how this moment would end. She thought I would cry. She thought years of humiliation would finally break me in front of everyone she knew. Instead, I took the envelope calmly. I opened it. I read every word carefully while 3 wedding cameras pointed directly at my face. Then I folded the letter once, twice, slipped it into my purse, and smiled. That smile changed the entire night, because nobody inside that ballroom knew something I had spent the last 6 years preparing for. Not Olivia, not the guests, and especially not my father. As I looked into his suddenly uncertain eyes, I realized something almost unbelievable. For the first time in my entire life, Richard Bennett looked afraid of me. I arrived in Savannah 3 hours before the ceremony under dark gray skies and cold coastal rain. The driver kept glancing at me through the mirror because I was wearing my formal military uniform. People always stared at the uniform, especially in the South. The gold buttons were polished perfectly. My ribbons sat straight across my chest. My dark hair was pulled into a tight regulation bun that already gave me a headache. 21 years in the army had taught me how to stand tall without showing discomfort. But the second the hotel came into view, that old heaviness returned to my chest. Because no battlefield had ever exhausted me the way my own family did. The Whitmore Grand Hotel looked like something designed for people who cared more about appearances than comfort. Tall white columns, perfect flower arrangements, valets moving like dancers beneath glowing gold lights. Everything sparkled. Nothing felt warm. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I heard someone whisper near the entrance. That must be Olivia's military sister. Not Claire, not daughter, not family, just the military sister. I smiled politely anyway because the army teaches you how to survive rooms where nobody truly wants you there. Inside, the ballroom smelled like roses and expensive perfume. Servers floated through the crowd carrying champagne while a string quartet played near the dance floor. Then I saw my father standing near the bar. Richard Bennett, 71 years old. Silver hair, navy tuxedo. The same cold expression he had worn ever since my mother died 15 years earlier. For one stupid second, I thought maybe age had softened him. Then his eyes met mine. Nothing.
No smile. No pride.
No, I'm glad you made it. Just a short nod like I was another guest arriving late. I walked toward him, anyway.
That.
You're late. I checked my watch automatically. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. You still should have arrived earlier. Olivia's been stressed all day. Of course she had. Olivia treated attention like oxygen. The second it shifted away from her, she panicked. I came straight from the airport, I said calmly. His eyes moved slowly across my uniform. You really wore that? There it was. Not even disguised. I kept my voice steady. It's formal military attire. You could have worn a normal dress. I almost laughed. 21 years serving the country. 2 overseas deployments. Countless military commendations. And somehow the embarrassing thing was still the uniform. Before I could answer, Olivia appeared beside us, smiling like a magazine advertisement. Perfect blonde curls. Diamond earrings. Bright white dress. Everything about her looked carefully calculated. She air-kissed my cheek without actually touching me. Claire, she said brightly. People have been talking about your outfit all afternoon. Not service. Not sacrifice. Outfit. I noticed one of the wedding videographers suddenly drift closer to us. That was intentional. Everything Olivia did was intentional. "You're at table 14, she added casually. I looked across the ballroom immediately. Table 14 sat near the kitchen doors, the furthest possible seat from the family tables. Even my father's golf friends sat closer to the stage than I did. Something cold moved quietly through my stomach. But I only nodded. "Sounds good." Olivia looked disappointed by my reaction. She wanted visible pain. That was the problem with people like my sister. Cruelty meant nothing unless someone witnessed it. Then she smiled sweetly and said quietly enough that only I could hear it, "Try not to disappear early this time." 5 years earlier, I had walked out of Thanksgiving dinner after Olivia joked that soldiers came home with government-funded emotional problems. My father laughed harder than anyone else at the table. 2 weeks before that dinner, I had lost a 19-year-old soldier under my command overseas. I never told him that. Some things are too sacred to explain to careless people. The ceremony passed in a blur of music, fake smiles, and carefully staged family photographs. I stood where I was told, smiled when expected, clapped on cue. But the entire time, I felt it building beneath the surface. The whispers, the strange glances. My father disappearing repeatedly with Olivia and her new husband Ethan. Years in military intelligence teach you how to recognize coordinated behavior. Something had been planned.
I just did not know exactly what yet.
Dinner arrived.
Steak.
Roasted potatoes. Expensive wine I barely tasted. Olivia floated from table to table performing happiness for the cameras while Ethan followed beside her looking increasingly overwhelmed.
Poor guy.
He still thought he married into a normal family. Then, halfway through dessert, my father stood and picked up a microphone. The soft jazz music stopped immediately. "Before we continue tonight," he announced calmly, "there's something else that needs to be addressed." Every instinct inside me went still. Guests turned toward my table. My father walked slowly across the ballroom while one of the videographers moved carefully behind him to capture everything. Of course, this had been planned down to the camera angles. When he stopped beside me, he reached into his jacket and removed a cream-colored envelope. "This," he said evenly, "is from the family." The ballroom became painfully quiet. I took the envelope without speaking. The paper felt thick and expensive in my hands. Inside were several folded pages with multiple signatures already visible near the bottom. My father remained standing over me while I opened it. He wanted everyone to watch my reaction. So I gave him exactly what he asked for. I read every line carefully. A formal letter.
Cold.
Polite. Cruel in the way wealthy families often prefer. According to the letter, my choices, behavior, emotional distance, and military lifestyle had brought embarrassment to the family for years. From that moment forward, I was no longer welcome at holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, or family gatherings. They were officially separating themselves from me. At the bottom sat the signatures. Richard Bennett, Olivia Bennett Cole, several relatives, even my mother's older sister. Across the ballroom, Olivia stood perfectly still beside Ethan, holding her champagne glass with both hands, waiting, almost excited. She wanted tears. She wanted humiliation. She wanted me running out of the ballroom while guests whispered about the unstable military daughter. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the signatures. Not because I was shocked, because suddenly everything made sense. The tension, the rehearsed smiles, the cameras. This was never a wedding reception. It was an execution. The pathetic part was they believed the letter gave them power. Slowly, I folded the pages once, then twice, slipped them into my purse, and looked directly at my father. "Thank you," I said calmly, "for finally putting it in writing." His expression changed instantly. Not anger, confusion. That almost made me smile. Because for the first time all evening, nothing was unfolding the way they expected. Olivia recovered first. She forced out a soft, nervous laugh into her microphone. "Well," she said brightly, "I think honesty is important in families." Families. Interesting word choice from a woman who once mailed my deployment care package back unopened because it arrived during her birthday weekend. I stood slowly from my chair. The entire ballroom followed the movement immediately. "I agree," I said quietly. And suddenly the room no longer belonged to them. My father crossed his arms tightly as I stood there holding the microphone. "You've always blamed this family for your own decisions," he said coldly. There it was, the rewriting. Richard Bennett had spent years telling people I abandoned my family for military ambition, as if joining the army at 18 had been some selfish adventure instead of survival. What he never told anyone was that our electricity had been shut off twice after my mother died. Or that I skipped meals during my senior year so Olivia could continue cheerleading and dance competitions without embarrassment. Or that 6 months after Mom's funeral, my father somehow found enough money to buy Olivia a brand new Mustang while I worked double shifts at a diner to afford secondhand combat boots before basic training. People only knew the polished version of our family, not the truth underneath it. I looked around the ballroom slowly before speaking again. For years, I said calmly, I sent money home every single month. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. My father's mortgage payments, medical bills, Olivia's tuition, car payments, credit card debt. Olivia laughed nervously beside Ethan. "Oh my God, Claire, stop acting like you raised us." I ignored her, because the memories were already pulling me backward. I remembered sitting inside a military tent overseas eating cold cafeteria food while wiring thousands of dollars home after Olivia called crying because her luxury apartment lease was in danger. I remembered taking emergency overtime assignments after my father claimed his business was collapsing again. I remembered sleeping 4 hours a night while supporting people who treated me like an inconvenience the second I stopped being useful. And the worst part? I truly believed loyalty would eventually earn love. That is what emotionally neglected daughters do. They keep sacrificing themselves hoping one day somebody finally notices. But people who benefit from your silence rarely reward it. They depend on it. I spent years believing family meant unconditional support. I continued quietly. Meanwhile, every time I succeeded, this family acted embarrassed by me. Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically. "You were never home."
No, iyan shuarat shufli.
I was deployed. That shut her up. The ballroom remained completely silent now. Even the hotel staff, near the walls, had stopped pretending not to listen. I took a slow breath before continuing. 6 years ago, I said, something happened that changed the way I saw all of you forever. My father's face tightened instantly.
Good.
Because he knew exactly what was coming next. At first, I continued, I thought someone had stolen my identity. Olivia's confidence disappeared immediately. Ethan looked back and forth between us in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked carefully. I looked directly at my father. I started receiving collection notices connected to loans I never opened. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because deep down, every person in that ballroom suddenly realized the story was much bigger than a family argument at a wedding. And for the first time all evening, my father no longer looked confident. He looked nervous. The silence inside the ballroom felt heavy enough to break glass. Ethan looked directly at Olivia now. "What loans?" Olivia immediately grabbed his arm. "Baby, she's exaggerating." "No," I said calmly. "Actually, I'm simplifying." My father stepped forward sharply. "That's enough, Claire." Funny. After publicly disowning me during dessert, suddenly he wanted privacy. I looked around the ballroom again. Men in tailored tuxedos. Women frozen with champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Relatives avoiding eye contact because somewhere deep down they already knew pieces of the truth. I confronted my father privately 6 years ago. I continued. I assumed he would fix it. My father's jaw tightened visibly. He told me he was desperate. Told me the business was struggling. Told me Olivia needed help. Ethan slowly turned toward his new wife. "What does that mean?" Olivia's breathing became shallow. "Richard," one of my aunts whispered nervously from across the room. "Tell me she's lying." My father ignored her completely. Classic Richard Bennett. Never answer directly when manipulation might still work. I reached calmly into my purse and removed a thin manila folder. That single movement changed the entire atmosphere, because suddenly this no longer sounded emotional. It sounded documented. At first, I stayed quiet because I was ashamed. I admitted. Not ashamed of them. Ashamed that I kept allowing it. I opened the folder carefully. Inside sat years of evidence. Bank statements, transfer records, loan documents, copies of signatures. Paper has a terrifying effect on dishonest people, especially when witnesses are present. I spent years financially supporting this family, I said quietly. While they told relatives I was unstable after deployment. Several guests visibly reacted to that.
Good.
Because that part still disgusted me the most. Not the money. The character assassination. My father finally snapped. You have no idea what pressure this family was under. I almost laughed. Pressure. Interesting word from a man who slept peacefully while his daughter worked military overtime to keep his business alive.
No, i raplia shufli.
I know exactly what pressure feels like. The room went completely still again. Because everyone understood I was no longer talking about finances. I was talking about war.
Loss.
Survival. The kind of pressure wealthy families discuss politely over wine, but never truly understand. I removed several papers from the folder and held them lightly in my hand. I kept receipts, I said calmly. That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. Olivia's face lost color instantly. Ethan stepped away from her slightly, without realizing he had done it. Small movement. Huge meaning. She's trying to humiliate us, Olivia whispered desperately. I looked directly at her. No, I said quietly. You invited 200 people to watch you humiliate me. I'm just refusing to stay silent. Anymore. A woman near the back muttered softly. Jesus. Nobody disagreed. I continued before anyone could interrupt. 6 years ago, I stopped begging this family to love me fairly. Instead, I started documenting everything. My father stared at the folder like it contained a weapon. In a way, it did. Because truth becomes dangerous the moment somebody finally stops protecting a lie. Then I delivered the sentence that completely shattered the room. Earlier today, I said calmly, my attorney sent copies of these records to federal investigators. The ballroom exploded into whispers. Olivia looked like she might collapse. And for the first time in my life, Richard Bennett looked genuinely afraid. The ballroom doors opened less than 30 seconds later. 2 men in dark suits stepped quietly inside.
No dramatic entrance.
No raised voices. Just calm expressions and the kind of quiet authority that instantly changes the temperature in a room. The older man scanned the ballroom once before speaking. Mr. Richard Bennett? Nobody moved at first. Then my father slowly straightened his jacket, like posture alone could restore control. I think there's been some misunderstanding, he said carefully. Of course. That was his favorite word whenever consequences appeared. Misunderstanding. Accounting issue. Temporary oversight. Men like my father wrapped betrayal in polite language until other people questioned their own instincts. The older investigator stepped forward calmly. We only need a private conversation, sir. The whispers across the ballroom grew louder immediately. Guests leaned toward each other. Phones quietly appeared beneath tables. Somebody near the back was already recording openly now. Olivia turned toward me with pure panic in her eyes. You planned this, she hissed. I shook my head slowly.
No, Olivia.
I prepared for it. There is a difference. Planning comes from anger. Preparation comes from survival. Ethan looked completely lost now. He stared between Olivia, my father, and the investigators like he no longer recognized any of us. Then finally he asked the question that mattered most. How much did you know? Olivia froze. Wrong pause.
1.
Terrible pause can destroy an entire relationship faster than screaming ever could. Ethan, she whispered carefully, please don't do this here. That's not an answer. His voice sounded exhausted already, like a man realizing his marriage had ended before the reception dinner was even cleared away. My father tried stepping back into control. This has nothing to do with Olivia. But Ethan ignored him completely.
Good.
Because for the first time all night, someone was finally seeing the family clearly. One of my relatives stood slowly from her chair.
It was Aunt Marianne.
Her hands trembled slightly against the tablecloth. Richard, she said quietly, Tell me this isn't true." My father's silence answered for him. The entire ballroom shifted emotionally after that. You could feel people pulling away from him. Not physically, socially, emotionally. The illusion was collapsing. And wealthy families survive on illusion more than anything else. Olivia suddenly pointed at me again. She always hated us because Dad loved me more. That sentence hung in the air like broken glass. A few guests visibly winced, because some truths sound ugly even when spoken honestly. I looked at my sister for a long moment before answering. "No," I said softly. "I hated what you became because of it." That finally broke her composure. "You think you're better than everyone because you joined the military," she snapped.
No, y replica calmly.
"But the military taught me something important." My father crossed his arms tightly. "What's that?" I held his eyes steadily. "That survival doesn't require permission." Neither investigator spoke after that. They did not need to. The evidence already existed. The damage had already been done. And standing there beneath glowing chandeliers while whispers filled the ballroom, my father finally looked exactly like what he truly was. Not powerful, not respected, just a frightened old man watching control disappear in real time. I walked out of the ballroom before anyone could stop me. Behind me, the reception had dissolved into whispers, confusion, and quiet panic. The warm Savannah air felt heavy with incoming rain as I stepped beneath the hotel. Entrance lights. For the first time all night, I finally exhaled fully. My phone vibrated inside my purse almost immediately. It was my attorney, Michael Hayes. I answered while walking farther away from the entrance. "Please tell me this isn't terrible timing," I said tiredly. "Claire," he replied carefully, "there's something else we uncovered about your mother's estate." I stopped walking. The rain began softly around me, tapping against the pavement and hotel awning. "What do you mean?" A brief pause. "Your mother created a second trust before she passed away." I frowned immediately. "That's impossible. My father handled everything after her death." That's what he believed. Something in Michael's voice made my chest tighten. Across the street, Savannah's harbor lights reflected across wet pavement while distant music drifted from another wedding somewhere nearby. "What kind of trust?" I asked quietly. "A conditional inheritance." My heartbeat slowed strangely. Military training does that sometimes during high-stress moments. Your emotions become colder instead of louder. "What conditions?" Silence. Then Michael answered softly. "You had to be formally separated from the Bennett family." For several seconds, I could not speak at all. Rain collected along the sleeves of my uniform while the noise from the ballroom faded into the distance behind me. My mother knew. Even before she died, somehow she knew exactly what this family would eventually become. And somehow she knew what would happen to me inside it. Michael's voice softened. "I think your mother was trying to protect you." That broke me more than the wedding ever did. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just two quiet tears slipping down my face into the rain. Because I had spent years believing nobody truly saw me. And somehow my mother had understood everything before I even understood it myself. "What's in the trust?" I finally asked. "A lake house in northern Georgia. Investment accounts. Family heirlooms." He paused gently. "And several letters addressed to you personally." Letters.
God.
I closed my eyes briefly as memories flooded back all at once. My mother sitting at the kitchen table writing.
Christmas cards.
Her soft voice reading beside me during thunderstorms. The way she used to squeeze my shoulder whenever my father criticized me too harshly. Then Michael quietly added one final sentence. "Your father tried challenging the trust years ago, but legally, he could not touch it unless the release conditions were met." A bitter laugh escaped my throat softly. "So tonight," I whispered, "he accidentally handed me my freedom." And for the first time all evening, revenge no longer mattered nearly as much as peace. Daniel found me outside nearly 20 minutes later. His bow tie hung loose around his collar, and the exhaustion on his face made him look 10 years older than he had that morning. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain continued falling softly across the Savannah streets, while the ballroom behind us buzzed with damage control and whispered conversations. Finally, he looked at me and asked quietly, "How long did you know about the fraud?" 6 years. He stared toward the street in disbelief. "And you waited that long?" I needed proof. Daniel nodded slowly, like someone finally connecting pieces of a puzzle he never wanted solved. "She told me you were cruel," he admitted quietly. I looked at him for a second before answering. That probably made things easier for her. He laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Only disappointment. Then he asked the question I think already terrified him. Was any of this marriage real? I could have softened the answer, but I was too tired for careful lies anymore. "Olivia loves attention," I said honestly. "I'm not sure she understands love beyond that." Daniel looked away immediately. Part of him already knew. Before leaving, he stopped beside me one last time. "You deserved better from them," he said quietly. Those words hurt more than the disowning letter ever could. Because genuine accountability had been so rare in my family that hearing simple honesty almost felt unfamiliar. By morning, wedding videos had already spread online. Decorated Army officer publicly disowned during sister's wedding. Federal investigators arrive moments later. Savannah society consumed the story within
Hours.
Within 2 weeks, Daniel filed for an annulment. 3 months later, my father's business permanently collapsed. Olivia disappeared from social media completely. Funny how quickly power disappears once people stop protecting the illusion around it. But none of those consequences mattered as much as the lake house. I visited it alone 6 weeks later during early autumn. Northern Georgia looked beautiful that time of year. Golden leaves, cold mountain air, silence that felt peaceful instead of lonely. The house itself was small, quiet, and warm in ways my childhood home never was. And waiting on the kitchen table exactly where Michael promised they would be sat 5 handwritten letters from my mother. I spent hours reading every word. Stories,
Advice.
memories she never got the chance to tell me in person. But one sentence stayed with me longer than all the others. "One day they will mistake your silence for weakness. Let them." I understood it completely now. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes the strongest people are simply the ones who learned how to endure quietly until freedom finally arrives. The letter my family handed me that night was supposed to destroy me. Instead, it finally released me. And if this story stayed with you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Because sometimes the hardest thing a person will ever do is stop begging toxic people for the love they were never willing to give.